Mike Johnson had a sit-down meeting with a bunch of leadership. That included Hakeem Jeffries, that included Senator Schumer, who's the Senate Majority Leader. Hakeem Jeffries is the House Minority Leader for the Democrats. Schumer is the the Senate Majority Leader for the Democrats. And then, of course, there was Kamala Harris, President Joe Biden, Kamala Harris being Vice President, Senate Minority Leader for the Republicans, Mitch McConnell, and then finally we have the leader of the Republicans in the House, which make up a slight majority with 2 votes after New York's 3rd district election, with Mike Johnson. And they all agreed on one thing, because the government is looming on a shutdown this weekend, meaning that if they can't come to an agreement on making a budget or another extension, which Mike Johnson previously had committed not to doing, but at this point, with only a week left and no big deal in sight, it might be the only option he has to avoid a government shutdown, which would be disastrous for the Republicans. After going through Kevin McCarthy, Jim Jordan, Steve Scalise, I think, was it Steve Scalise? I forget, man. It's been such a while since that House race. Going through all the House leadership, Tom Emmer, before finally getting to Mike Johnson. Having all this clog up for the last year of getting really nothing done, to the point where Republican congressmen were complaining that they don't really have anything to brag about when they go back to the districts about, this is what I've done for you. And then they're going to shut down the government. And let me just say, shutting down the government isn't just some abstract concept. And it isn't even something you should be really like playing footsie with either, even if you jump out of the train last second. Investors take note if you were close to a government shutdown. That isn't good for the economy. It isn't good for national stability. And if you're playing footsie with a national shutdown, even if you didn't mean to, you always run the risk of stumbling into one. And then what happens? The national parks shut down, federal employees go on furlough and they're not getting paid. Many federal offices are going to either reduce their services. Many public services will either reduce their services or close it down altogether. The government services that are going to stay open will be things that are essential, like police departments and stuff like that. But this will have a negative effect on people's living standards. This will have a negative, especially those who work for the federal government, and it will have a negative effect on the country. And so it isn't really something you should be playing footsie with, not to mention, of course, these departments need the funding. They need it. And so Mike Johnson wants to avoid it. But if he's unable to come to a consensus with the Democrats, they can't just keep on doing continuing resolution to continuing resolution and extension forever. They have to come to some sort of deal. So Mike Johnson is saying that he plans to come to some sort of deal by the time the week is over, that a shutdown is not an option. But he better stay by those words. It'd be better for the country and most certainly better for him politically, even if there are some far-right congressmen and some rumblings online like, let the shutdown happen. We need a shutdown to get those Democrats in line. I really don't think, if the Republicans fail to pass a budget, that it'll end up reflecting poorly on the Democrats if the reason they didn't pass a budget is because they couldn't even agree on another extending resolution. But this is only part of the meeting. Once, the cameras go out and they're all together, what happens seems to be like a full court press from Hakeem Jeffries, Chuck Schumer, Biden, Kamala, and Republican leadership, Mitch McConnell. They all pressure Mike Johnson about the moment and the pressure that Ukraine is under militarily right now and the need to send aid, as they've been holding up these negotiations since September of last year. And after the bipartisan immigration deal, which Mike Johnson said there had to be reform on immigration, there had to be legislative reform on immigration if there is going to be a deal. For first he was like, okay, here's some money. He's like, no, it has to be reform. And so they negotiate for 5 months with one of the border hawks, Senator Langford from Oklahoma. And Senator Langford makes a deal. It looks good and promising. It had the support of the majority of Republicans in the Senate. It seemed to have a decent support in the House. It had really good chances of passing. Then Trump sunk it for his campaign. Mike Johnson got in line, but Mike Johnson put himself in the pickle where he said in order to pass Ukraine aid, they would have to fix the border. Then they proposed a deal that would deal with both. But then if they were to deal with both, that could help Biden politically. And so Donald Trump, caring about himself over all other things, he had to sink the deal. And so now that the deal's sunken, he sunk this deal that would have satisfied Mike Johnson's demands, would have gotten him and Republicans a lot of victories, since the majority of the deal was trying to please their concerns, the concerns of senators like Senator Langford. But it got sunk. And so now he's in the position where he made this demand that was then given to him, and then he had to sink it for Trump. But now, as they're like, okay, let's pass the separate deal, separate from that, can't do that because he needs border compromise. So it's give us Ukraine aid. No, border deal first. Fine, here's border deal. Shoots border deal. Okay, can we pass Ukraine aid? No, border deal first. So that's the situation we're in, and that seems to be untenable. That type of decision atrophy seems to be untenable for both congressional leadership, and is untenable for Ukraine's strategic situation as the Russians continue to push on villages outside of Avdiivka, capturing three villages outside of Avdiivka in around a week. In about a week, maybe 2 weeks max, they're capturing these villages, continuing to push as the Ukrainians try to stabilize the line. They are delivering heavy losses on the Russians, but the Russians are making 85% of their recruitment ratios of their recruitment requests, and they are continuing to push, taking those high casualties, trying to take advantage of the moment. And Chuck Schumer even made the point, as everybody in the room was pressuring him, that Mike Johnson had to stand up for the history of the moment. You know, Mike Johnson said when he became House Speaker that he would not abandon Ukraine. Well, now would be the time to prove that that wasn't a lie, because to all the observers who have been following this debate since September, or have been following Congress's inability to pass aid since, well, I think it's been like, what, over 400 something days since congressionally approved aid had been sent over. Because that was the last time Congress really passed a big deal on this. Not even talking about the September, the negotiations that have been going on since September. If this aid is not sent, it will have a huge detrimental effect when it comes to our deterrence, when it comes to Ukraine's stability, when it comes to our allies thinking that we care about the security interests and them reciprocating that when it comes to our security interests, when it comes to economic stability, with Europe being our main export market, and Europe and the United States, North America, making up 45% of the world's GDP. It would be bad when it comes to the commitments we've made to them in the 90s and nuclear non-proliferation. It would be bad for the Russians continuing to push elsewhere. I could spend all day talking about how we need to empower the Ukrainians and why we need to do it. And I mean, that's at least my belief. But Mike Johnson, when asked, at least publicly, will say it is important to support Ukraine and that they will support Ukraine. But his statement was that he will do it in a timely manner. That's what he told the press. And then he doubled down that the president of the United States needs to take executive action to move on the border. I do want to remind people, before we watch this spiel about executive action, that Donald Trump did say during his administration that there had to be legislative changes in order for him to do everything he needed to do necessary on the border, and that it could not just be done by executive action. And so saying that everything on the border could be dealt with executive action, when even the previous admin said that they're, according to his goals, which line closely with Mike Johnson's goals, that they had to take some legislative reforms, and many of the legislative reforms in the compromise bill were reforms that the Republicans have been asking for a better part of a decade. I don't buy it. And I'm pretty firm on the idea that if Trump didn't sink it, the deal probably would have went through.
Thank you. Thank you all for staying. We had a couple of meetings there. It was
why is this only through one earphone?
Frank and honest, I think, first.
Is there any way to make this mono audio? Not video quality, audio quality. I don't think so. Is Johnson deaf on one side? I don't know how to make, I don't think I can make this mono audio. I don't know how to do it from here. But we'll just have to listen to it and make do.
Thank you. Thank you all for staying. We had a couple of meetings there. It was frank and honest. I think we need more frank and honest conversations on Capitol Hill. So I was happy to participate in this. We did that as a group, and then I had a one-on-one for a period of time with the president, just he and I in the Oval Office. Let me say this. When I showed up today, my purpose was to express what I believe is the obvious truth, and that is that we must take care of America's needs first. When you talk about America's needs, you have to talk first about our open border. I've been, I believe, in maybe 20-something states over the last several weeks, going around the country, appearing at events with my colleagues, and we're hearing from the American people of all parties and all persuasions in all cities and all states who feel this acutely. They understand the catastrophe at the border is affecting everyone, and it is top of mind for all the American people for that reason. So I brought that issue up repeatedly today in that room and again one-on-one with the president. I think that's our responsibility to bring that up. The other big priority for...
Okay, so let's just quickly throw this through. Again, there was a border deal. It was a border deal that really, by the way, pissed off progressives. And there was part of that deal that I also did not like. I don't like the idea of a cap. There's many reasons why. I don't want to get into it because the deal's probably dead anyway. But you had that compromise. Then you sunk that compromise. What do you want? Another 5 months of negotiation? Do you think we have 5 months of negotiation? Do you think we can call up Vladimir Putin and say, pretty please, please wait? One of your main geostrategic foes is going through something called decision atrophy, meaning they can do nothing to stop you because of internal divisions that you have helped foster and have invested the better part of a decade to foster. Could you please wait? Could you please wait? Because it looks like right now the fruits of your labor are starting to present themselves. So since you made this, could you just time out a little? Can we time this war out? We've already been waiting since September. Do we have to wait till April, May, June, July? What about next year? Do we just have to wait through the election season and just hope and pray that the dead will not become so unbearable for the Ukrainians, because the dead will rise if we don't give them the supplies necessary to fight, because then they're just going to have to staff more soldiers on the front in order to hold the line, because they can rely less and less and less on artillery ammunition to help hold back the assaults. It will probably mean the loss of more villages. It'll probably mean more occupied towns, cities, and if they don't break through, maybe then after the win, because his only response is in a timely manner. But dealing with one of the most divisive issues in the United States in a timely manner, that has been an issue of debate for a very long time, when you have a 2-seat majority, don't have the Senate, and a presidency that is opposed to you, hey, it's a little bit of a tall order, but it was still done. And in 5 months, they tried to do it as fast as possible, understanding the conditions and the hurt that was going on overseas right now. We had to help our allies, the allies we committed ourselves to. But no. That was not good enough. Not good enough for Trump. It wasn't good enough for Trump, not because it wasn't good enough for the country. It wasn't good enough for Trump's campaign.
For our country, of course, is the funding of our government. And we have been working in good faith around the clock every single day for months and weeks and over the last several days, quite literally around the clock, to get that job done. We're very optimistic. I hope that the other leaders came out here and told you the same. We believe that we can get to agreement on these issues and prevent a government shutdown, and that's our first responsibility. You also heard, I'm sure, that there was discussion about the supplemental spending package. And I was very clear with the president and all those in the room that the House is actively pursuing and investigating all the various options on that.
The supplemental is the aid package to Ukraine, Israel, Taiwan.
And we will address that in a timely manner. We've been waiting since September. It's already not in a timely manner. It is timely in what way? Timely is, quickly? Because if it was quickly, then this would have been dealt with since September when you weren't even House Speaker. It would have been dealt with under Kevin McCarthy, right? But then we had to wait for the House leadership race, which was already putting it off for too long. Then you get in there, and now we had to wait through September, October, November, December, January, February, and now we're going into March. So you saying timely manner after we've had to wait, what, like half a year? It doesn't inspire confidence. But again, the first priority of the country.
By the way, can I just throw out there, again, helping our allies helps the United States. If trade with Europe was to go down, states like Ohio that produce goods that are then sold in Europe would hurt. There would be job loss. There would be loss in the industrial sector we're trying to build up, that the Europeans are scared of the investments we're making and trying to promote our own industry because they don't know if they can even compete with that. But if the Europeans do not consume our products as our main export market, that does hurt us. That's a very basic, just like reason about trade as to why we're interested. There's other reasons as well, trying to provoke, trying to stop provocation in other areas like Estonia. But trying to isolate it like, oh, that's the world and this is here. I find that ridiculous. The world is interconnected. The housing crisis affected the Chinese market, and if the Chinese were to just disappear tomorrow, that'd affect the United States too. Trying to separate us from the interconnectedness of the world is a foolhardy game.
Our border and making sure it's secure. I believe the president can take executive authority right now today to change that. And I told him that again today in person, as I've said to him many times, publicly and privately over the last several weeks. It's time for action. It is a catastrophe, and it must stop. And we will get the government funded, and we'll keep working on that. So we'll have more for you soon.
Can I also just throw out there that tying the border to this national security issue is still bizarre. It is wild. These two issues have never been tied together before. They weren't tied together at the start of the war. They weren't tied together when it came to previous aid packages to Ukraine between 2014 to 2022, no matter how small they were. They weren't tied to issues of aid to Afghanistan. Weren't tied to any of these things before. And if this is the case, can we tie, for example, I don't know, federalize abortion legalization with aid packages to Israel? Could we tie, I don't know, bringing back the child tax credit to any intervention on the cartels in Mexico, even if it's just intel assistance to the Mexicans? But like, why, like when you tie these things together, even if something's in the national security interest of the United States, what you're doing is trying to leverage that for political gain. And therefore, something that could have been bipartisan, something that could have been dealt with when it comes to the security of the United States, or when it comes to the stability of Europe, or when it comes to supporting our allies, is thrown under the bus. And don't think that this just stays within American domestic politics and our allies aren't paying attention. I mean, our allies are paying attention. The Poles have criticized this, which Republicans have responded to. Previous British prime ministers have criticized this, even the ones that go to their CPAC conventions. Estonian, Latvian, Lithuanian politicians have criticized this. Tons of different European officials have criticized this. The German prime minister came over to the United States to try to grease the wheels on this. And if you're South Korea and you're reliant on the American nuclear umbrella and you see the border get tied into one of our allies' security, you start wondering, wait, if the North Koreans crossed the line and there was a nuclear deterrent stopping them from using nuclear weapons, what if all of a sudden American security assistance to Korea gets tied to, either the banning or federal legalization in every state of the death penalty, or of something completely unrelated? What if, for example, a gay book ban got tied to South Korean security? What if transgender medical treatment regulation got tied to the future security of Taiwan? I don't like this. I don't like that. I understand to a certain degree, you gotta, find some compromise with people to get legislation through. Sometimes there's some bundling, but the fact that this is now holding up this crucial security assistance for so long, I think it shows the flaw with this as a model of negotiation for the country. Not to mention, even if we do end up passing this, let's say that the Republicans still control the House or the Republicans take over the Senate. What if this type of behavior is, rewarded and we go along with this? How long until, hey, we need to send over another aid package. Ukrainians held off. The Russians are doing shaky. This is a good chance to take advantage and, push the initiative. We could secure security, whatever it is. And they're like, okay, great. Now you need to give us HR2. Now you need to give us this new standard. And if it's HR2, or if it's a standard that is unmeetable, then eventually, even if you meet standard once, twice, thrice, eventually you'll find some compromise you're unwilling to make. And then our national security priority is reliant on us finding solutions to some of the most divisive issues in the countries within like a 1 to 2 to 3 month period, constrained to the conditions of war. Meaning then the battlefield conditions in Ukraine get constrained and tied to American social issues. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. It's dangerous. It's silly. It makes no sense from a national security perspective. Chuck Schumer responded to this statement from Mike Johnson to reporters. I wanted to play that quickly since, you know, he is the Senate Majority Leader, and Hakeem Jeffries was backing him up.
Meeting on Ukraine was one of the most intense I have ever encountered in my many meetings in the Oval Office. The five of us, the President, the Vice President, Leader McConnell, Leader Jeffries, and myself, made it so clear how vital this was to the United States. This was so important. And that we couldn't afford to wait a month or 2 months or 3 months because we would, in all likelihood, lose the war. NATO would be fractured at best. Allies would turn away from the United States. And the boldest leaders, the boldest autocrats of the world, the Putins, the Xis, the presidents of North Korea and Iran would be emboldened, thinking that the United States was this soft, fat country that lost its way and would take advantage. And so we said to the Speaker, get it done. I told him this is one of the moments that history is looking over your shoulder. And if you don't do the right thing, whatever the immediate politics are, you will regret it. It's in his hands. We told him how important it was. It was passionate. I talked about my trip to Ukraine, where I met soldiers who had Russian artillery in range with the drones they have, but had no ammunition to fire at them.
This is an extremely common story. I've heard it personally. I know many other people that have heard it personally. I've gone out into the field with these soldiers and see how few shells they have. And I'm looking at like 6, 7 shells, and I'm like, if there's like a big assault across this field, they fire 6, 7 shells. Do they just retreat? Do they just, okay, well, I hope the frontline soldiers are good in hand-to-hand combat. I mean, if the situation gets bad enough, I know I've read at least one report of an artillery crew being turned, like many of their crewmen being taken away, given rifles, sent into the infantry. And I mean, you know, that's taking people with great skills and skills that could be used on the battlefield and diverting them to other tasks where they have shortages, where they could be put to much better use if they just had the ammunition.
We talked about 4 brigades who are ready to go.
Imagine how frustrating that must be. Oh, there's the enemy. Oh, there's the enemy again. Oh, there's the enemy again. We've played that footage on stream. Ukrainian soldiers is watching the Russian soldiers dig in from miles away, unable to do anything because they only have like approved 5 shells to fire. And, you know, they would need 10. Or, oh, there's an assault. We have 5 shells. We fire all 5. We need 5 more to stop them up. That's too bad. We can't. It must be unbelievably frustrating. Having the skills to fight, having the gun to fight, even though there is also a problem with gun part replacements, with reports indicating as of recently that some M777 howitzers that were sent over were faulty or sent over even with faulty parts. If you have the gun and you have the enemy in range and you have the enemy targeted and you got the skills to do it and you just don't got the ammo, oh my God, I can't believe I wouldn't be able to comprehend without personal experience how frustrating that must be.
Ukrainian, no arms, and how serious the lack of arms was. And it was the consensus in that room, Zelensky and Ukraine will lose the war if we don't get the arms and don't get them quickly.
Now, I don't know what standard he means by lose the war, if he means like lose the whole country or lose a lot more territory, but it is true that if we just completely cut off Ukraine, the Russians will be pushing a lot this year. And as the Europeans try to make up that shell deficit, as the North Koreans have sent between 1 million and a recent report saying it could be as high as 3 million, but we don't know, shells over to the Russians, and the Russians expand their shell production with them hoping to reach 2.7 million shells produced by the end of the year. Europeans are trying their best to reach, what was it, like 1.5 million shells by the end of the year. They're trying to purchase 800,000 shells, 500, 155 millimeter, 300, 122 millimeter shells. They're trying to make up for the deficit. The French even dropping their protest against buying the foreign shells, now in favor of buying the foreign shells, showing that the French, who wanted that money spent in the domestic European manufacturing, weapons manufacturing market, is taking the situation pretty seriously. We're going to talk about another way how the French are taking the situation seriously in a bit. Moving on, I do want to check out two responses to this speech from Senator Chuck Schumer, because, I wanted to always, at least give the opposing viewpoint a second to voice their opinion. This first one is from Congressman Brian Donalds. He is a rising star within the Republican House. He actually threw his hat in the ring for House Speaker. He didn't end up winning. I think he ended up getting like 30-something votes or something. He got semi pretty far, but not like he wasn't within like an arm's reach of it or anything. But he's certainly making his mark in the party. He responded to this saying, H.R. 2 has been sitting on Schumer's desk for 292 days. Biden could have reversed his open borders executive actions any day over the past 3 years. We're overrun with millions of unvetted illegals, and Americans are getting killed. Secure our border first. The time is now to put America first. So the first thing is, H.R. 2 is a posturing bill. It is not a passing bill. This is not something that when the Republicans crafted this, that they thought would ever pass or have any belief that it would pass. There, in fact, are even components of H.R. 2 that many Republicans, definitely in agricultural states, have objection to, because it's stuff that could end up undermining a lot of agricultural companies that were reliant on, to be blunt, undocumented migrant labor in order to make money in the business. And knowing that they are heavily reliant, even if it is an undocumented labor, it is at the very least migrant labor, whether it is not undocumented or not, in order to have these agricultural companies, keep a profit. Because there are a lot of Americans who aren't willing to work for the wages that they offer, and there are a lot of Americans who just don't want to do that type of hard labor. I remember there was, during the Trump admin, there was a crisis in the shrimping industry because a lot of the Mexican shrimpers and shrimpers from other countries that would get work visa contracts to come to the United States, their work visa contracts were restricted. So then these shrimping companies started trying to hire American. Many of the Americans would get into it for the first time, and then they would find, oh my God, this business is extremely hard. I don't have the skills. And then they just throw in their hat. And this was a big deal for the shrimping industry. And so there are elements of H.R. 2 that some Republicans might not even agree with. So asking for a posturing bill to be passed is silly. It's a negotiating starting point to show what the Republicans would ask for. Not even what the Republicans would ask for, because it's further than that. But Republicans, in their wildest dreams, could comprehend of asking for if they controlled everything. And asking for Chuck Schumer to pass that, it's posturing, mostly posturing. As for the executive actions, during the start of this, when they were asking for a border bill, back when this whole started, it was not, we're asking for the president to take executive action. It was border bill. And then they entered a negotiation for 5 months trying to create a border bill, because the idea, and Trump reiterated this during his term, was that there had to be a legislative solution, whether it came to the hiring of more immigration judges, whether it came to more investment in border funding, whether it came to any of these issues, whether it had to do with the regulations, with how Border Patrol operates, it had to be done with a legislative solution. So it cannot just all be fixed through executive action. There are certain things that Biden could do through executive action, but again, this all started through a legislative solution. They asked for a legislative solution, and now it feels like this is an attempt to shift the blame back on the Biden after they sunk the deal for Donald Trump's campaign. We're overrun with millions of unvetted illegals, and Americans are getting killed. I do want to throw out there that statistically, homeborn Americans, that means Americans naturalized, born in the United States, have a higher crime rate than migrants. Now, of course, you have to exclude the crime of illegally entering the country in the first place. But when you're talking about getting killed, you could, there are undocumented people who have killed Americans. But again, as a class, as a group of people, the murder rate is lower than homeborn Americans, if you want to call them that. Naturalized Americans. That's not I'm not trying to say that none of those people killed by undocumented people are, they're not important or anything like that. But statistically, it's just, the math doesn't add up. Secure our border first. Time to put America first. Again, this is, a repackaging of an old slogan, and I'm going to bring it up more. If you search America First with Google, all right, can we just search Google for America First? You'll get a bunch of different things. Yeah, but if you go to Wikipedia, America First, the first thing that comes up, a policy and slogan used by United States President Woodrow Wilson, Warren G. Harding, and Donald Trump. Now, a lot of these slogans were very prominent during not only the 1850s and 1920s, but also prominent as an objection to getting involved in sending gear to both the Soviets and the British during World War II. And for a certain period of time, that isolationist viewpoint was, even if it wasn't America First directly, was at least pretty popular in the United States until the throes of the war included the United States, and we realized that in this particular military engagement, we could not contain ourselves from the effects of the military engagement. So I understand the idea, like, we got to take care of ourselves first, but we cannot pretend that we are not part of the community or nations. If there's like a giant asteroid heading towards America, we cannot say, towards the whole planet, we can't say, oh, well, America first. Why do we got to care about that thing in space when we got homeless veterans in the United States? We can deal with both. You can chew and walk at the same time. I don't think America is so pathetic that we can only deal with one issue at a time. Charlie Kirk, he also responded to this, saying, Chuck Schumer tells reporters about how he tried to browbeat Speaker Mike Johnson into passing a $60 billion Ukraine aid bill. But I agree with him. Speaker Johnson blocking the Ukraine aid extortion racket will go down in history as one of Speaker Johnson's crowning achievements. Hold the line. God, man, for the good of our country, for the good of Europe, for the good of global security, for the good of Ukraine, let's hope that Charlie Kirk is wrong, and for the good of Mike Johnson's position in history and how people remember him. Let's hope for God's sake that he's wrong.